October 14, 1943. If hell had specific coordinates, on this particular Thursday morning, they were located 25,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. For the thousands of young men of the U.S. Army Air Forces, 8th Air Force, the sky was no longer blue. Through the thin plexiglass windows of a B-17 bomber, the only color visible was the color of death black. Hundreds of 88mm anti-aircraft guns were roaring from the ground below, weaving a suffocating web of fire across the bomber formation's flight path. Every second, dozens of black clouds erupted around the fuselage. The sound wasn't like a typical explosion, it was more like a giant manic hammer striking a massive, inverted iron bell. Dull, terrifying, and vibrating through your very internal organs. This was a massacre of inequality. In the extreme cold of this high altitude, temperatures plummeted to 40 degrees below zero. The thin air made thinking sluggish, yet fear was clearer than ever before. Imagine for a moment that you are sitting inside this aluminum can known as the Flying Fortress. The so-called fortress is actually just a skin of aluminum alloy, barely thicker than a coin. You can hear the German fighter machine guns raking the fuselage. A sound like hail smashing against a tin roof, but far more terrifying than the fighters is the flak. You cannot see when it launches. You cannot dodge it. You cannot shoot back. You sit there like a condemned man strapped to a target, waiting for fate's verdict. Suddenly, a cloud of black smoke detonates right off your right wing. This time, death does not pass you by. The shockwave instantly tosses this 30-ton beast sideways. Immediately following is the teeth-grating sound of metal tearing. A fragment from an 88mm shell has, in this instant, transformed into a serrated dagger from the underworld. It is rough, it is sharp, and it is scorching hot. It slices through the aircraft's aluminum skin at thousands of feet per second, severs hydraulic lines, and, carrying the smell of ozone and burning metal, rushes straight toward the radio operator in the fuselage. According to the script written before 1943, the next scene should be gruesome. This jagged fragment would slice through the airman's heavy leather jacket like tofu, shred his muscles, shatter his ribs, and tumble inside his soft chest cavity, turning his heart and lungs into a blur of blood and flesh. He would lose consciousness within seconds. Blood would spray across the freezing radio equipment, instantly crystallizing into raid ice in the high-altitude air. But on this day, the script was rewritten. In that split second of life and death, the fragment tore through the leather jacket, but did not drill into flesh. Instead, it produced a crisp, dull sound of impact clank. It sounded like a medieval knight taking a lance strike to his shield in a tournament. The young operator was thrown backward by the sheer kinetic force, crashing heavily onto the floor, littered with shell casings. Terrified, he reached for his chest, expecting to find warm, sticky liquid. But there was no blood, only searing pain and a massive bruise. Beneath his flight suit, he was wearing a strange vest. It looked puffy, heavy, and completely out of place in this era of high-tech aviation. It had no streamlined design, no advanced synthetic materials. It was, in fact, constructed in the most ancient of ways, overlapping steel plates sewn together like fish scales. This 18-pound iron vest had, in this very moment, stopped the Reaper's Sith cold. This was not standard issue equipment. For a long time, its very existence was considered unauthorized. How did it appear here? Why, on the eve of the atomic age, were the lives of pilots being saved by an ancient wisdom derived from the era of cold steel? To solve this riddle, we must leave the smoke-filled skies of Germany and turn the clock back 1 year to a British operating room filled with the smell of antiseptic and blood. October 1942, Chell Veston, England. Station 105. There is no deafening explosion here, only the metallic clink of a scalpel dropping onto a stainless steel tray and the suppressed groans of the wounded. For Colonel Malcolm Grow, this was his battlefield. As the chief surgeon of the 8th Air Force, what he faced every day were not arrows on a strategic map, but the broken bodies carried off on stretchers. Colonel Grow was a man of rigor, but he was also a man on the edge. Every day a mission returned, his operating room turned into a butcher shop. Young men who were eating powdered eggs in the mess hall that morning were, by evening, cold corpses or permanently disabled wrecks. On this particular day, Grow was treating a gunner pulled from a B-17. The soldier had a shocking wound in his abdomen, blood welling up uncontrollably. Grow skillfully incised the wound, probing deep with long metal forceps. After a tense search, he clamped onto the culprit and pulled it out. It was the thing he knew best, a piece of flak, an anti-aircraft shell fragment. Grow held this blood-stained, meat-covered piece of metal under the shadowless surgical lamp. It wasn't a bullet. It was an ugly, jagged piece of scrap iron. It looked insignificant, like rusty trash found by the roadside. Yet this piece of trash had just stolen a 20-year-old's future. In that era, all military conventional wisdom screamed one thing: putting body armor on infantry was stupid. The lessons of World War I proved that steel plates thick enough to stop rifle bullets were too heavy for soldiers to march, and plates light enough to carry couldn't stop the bullets. Therefore, the best defense was offense, and the best armor was mobility. But Colonel Grow was a scientist with keen insight. Through countless autopsies and surgeries, he noticed a detail that everyone else had ignored: a mathematical pattern hidden beneath the gore. He realized that the fatal wounds often shared a startling similarity. If a man was hit directly by a German fighter's machine gun bullet, the wound was usually a through-and-through puncture. High-velocity spinning bullets carry massive kinetic energy. It is normal that they cannot be stopped. However, among his patients, a staggering 70% of casualties were not caused by bullets, but by flak fragments. Crucially, Grow observed that many of these fragments did not fully penetrate the body. They often lodged in bones or stopped deep within the muscle. What did this mean? From a physics perspective, it meant that at the moment these fragments hit the human body, they were already spent forces. Their velocity had decayed significantly. They were low-velocity projectiles. Grow's mind began to race. What if we stopped trying to block high-speed machine gun rounds and focused solely on stopping this low-velocity trash? If we could block these fragments, could we reduce casualties by 70%? He pored over stacks of case files. Statistical data made him shudder. Among all those killed in action, 75% died because of fatal wounds to the torso. Chest wounds accounted for 36%, and abdominal wounds for 39%. In other words, if you could just put a metal box around these kids' chests to protect the heart, lungs, liver, and spleen, the death rate would drop off a cliff. It sounded like simple arithmetic. But at the time, this was a subversive, even crazy idea. The U.S. Army Air Forces had no body armor program in 1942. All budgets were poured into building planes and bombs. In total war, humans were sometimes viewed as more expendable than machines. No one cared about adding a shell to the pilot. They cared about adding another bomb. Grow decided to cut a path himself. But he faced a massive technical problem: space. Although the B-17 was called a flying fortress, its interior was claustrophobic. The ball turret gunner was curled up in a glass sphere like a fetus, knees touching his chin. The navigator lay prone over a table. The waist gunners needed to swing heavy machine guns in turbulence. If encased in solid steel plates, they couldn't even turn around, let alone operate complex instruments. He needed a material that was as hard as iron but as flexible as cloth. A paradox. In this dilemma, fate introduced him to the most unexpected ally. In London, there was a company called Wilkinson Sword. If you know the name, it might be because of razor blades. But in 1942, they were less wordsmiths. This company had been forging swords and bayonets for the officers of the British Empire since 1772. Their understanding of metal ran deeper than any modern defense contractor. They understood how to make steel obey the human body. rather than forcing the body to adapt to the steel. This was surely one of the most surreal scenes of World War II. An American military doctor, representing the most advanced aviation technology of the time, walking into an ancient workshop in London. Smelling of coal and rust, asking for help from a group of British craftsmen still using hammers and anvils. Grow unrolled his sketches, marked with the key anatomical areas requiring protection. The old craftsman at Wilkinson dug through dusty blueprints and found an answer from centuries ago: the Brigandine, or plate coat. This was an armor design popular in the late Middle Ages. Unlike a rigid breastplate, it consisted of many small metal plates arranged in overlapping rows like fish scales, riveted to the inside of a tough fabric. When the wearer bent over or twisted, these metal plates would slide over each other like the shell of an armadillo, providing excellent flexibility. But when struck by an external force, the overlapping structure would instantly lock up, distributing the impact. The design was there, but what about the material? Ordinary steel was too heavy, aluminum was too soft. Wilkinson's metal adjusters brought out their secret weapon at field manganese steel. This metal possessed magical properties. It contained about 13% manganese. The most incredible thing about this steel was its work-hardening characteristic. Simply put, it acted as if it were alive. When you treated it gently, it remained relatively ductile. But when it was subjected to violent shock like the high-speed impact of shrapnel, the crystal structure at the point of impact would instantly change, its hardness skyrocketing in microseconds to become impenetrable. The harder you hit it, the harder it became. Grow and the craftsmen began working day and night under dim lights. They cut the manganese steel into 2-inch squares, each only about 1 millimeter thick. Then, like the most patient tailors, they sewed these steel plates, one overlapping the other, into a heavy canvas vest. When the first prototype was finished, it looked ugly, rough, and even a bit comical. It weighed over 20 pounds, complete with a clumsy apron to protect the groin. But when Grow rapped his knuckles against it, the solid, dull sound was the sound of hope. However, the real battle had just begun. This battle would not be fought in the sky, but in the briefing room, when Colonel Grow brought this pile of scrap metal to the 8th Air Force headquarters. He was not greeted with applause, but with skeptical stares and open ridicule from the generals. You can imagine the reaction. To them, this was nonsense. "Colonel, do you know we are counting every ounce of weight? We don't even paint the planes to save fuel. This thing is 20 pounds. Do you want our pilots to move like turtles? If the plane catches fire, how do they bail out wearing this iron suit? This is murder. It will hurt morale." Giving them this is just admitting how dangerous the mission is. The resistance was mountainous. No budget, no official permission, no production line. Grow's actions, in the eyes of the bureaucracy, were practically unauthorized research. Grow didn't back down. He threw the vest onto the conference table with a heavy thud. He pointed at the officers and said, "If I'm right, we cut the death notifications in half. If you're right, we lose a few gallons of aviation fuel. Are you willing to take that bet?" To prove himself, Grow conducted a crazy live-fire test. He set up models simulating the human torso on a firing range and dressed them in the prototype vests. Then, instead of shooting them with a rifle, he detonated anti-aircraft shells nearby. When the smoke cleared, the silence was deafening. The jagged fragments, flying at 1,000 feet per second, fragments that would have torn a human body to shreds, had either bounced off or worse, stuck dead in the steel plates. What would have been a fatal evisceration was turned into shallow dents on the vest. As for the concern about bailing out, Grow demonstrated a genius, simple design. I red rip cord. One hard pull on this cord, and the entire vest would instantly disintegrate and fall away, ensuring it would never hinder a parachute jump. Faced with irrefutable facts, the brass finally relented, but this was only a small-scale trial. The real test would come in the brutal season known as Bloody Autumn. In the second half of 1943, The Allied bombing offensive reached its climax, and the German Luftwaffe flak defenses responded with peak ferocity. The first batch of vests, hand-sewn by Wilkinson Sword, was quietly sent to the front lines. At first, the pilots resisted, who wanted to wear another layer of heavy canvas and steel in a cramped cockpit. Ground crews heard men complaining. "It's like asking me to wear an overcoat while swimming." But after the first mission, everything changed. AB-17 limped back to base. The radio operator in the belly stumbled off the plane, his face pale. His aircraft had been riddled with holes. Just moments before, a piece of flak had punched through the fuselage, flying straight for his heart. With trembling hands, he dug into the front pocket of his vest and pried out a searing hot, sharp piece of metal. If not for that 1 millimeter layer of manganese steel, he would be a corpse. The story spread like wildfire across the bases. Overnight, the despised vest became a talisman more precious than cigarettes, chocolate, or photos of sweethearts back home. Ground crews watched as airmen threw away spare rations or left behind hundreds of rounds of ammo. Just to offset the weight of the vest, they refused to fly without. The data began to speak, and its voice was thunderous. In the months that followed, Colonel Grow tracked every casualty. The statistical result was a medical miracle. Among aircrews not wearing the armor, the mortality rate for chest wounds was 36%. For those wearing the M1 Flyer's vest, the mortality rate for chest wounds plummeted to 8%. The death rate for abdominal wounds dropped from 39% to 7%. It was a staggering victory. Just a few steel plates and canvas had increased the survival rate by more than 4 times, as demand skyrocketed. Wilkinson's small workshop could no longer feed the war machine. Blueprints were sent back to the United States. Even armor experts from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York were called in, using their study of medieval knightly armor to optimize the design for mass industrial production. Thousands of vests began to flow into Europe. Let us return our gaze to that terrifying Black Thursday in 1943, that night when the battered bomber formation stumbled back to British bases. Despite the catastrophic losses, despite the 60 bombers that never returned, hundreds of young men on the surviving planes stepped onto the tarmac alive. Men who were destined to die. They hugged each other. Some kissed the vests, now scarred with scratches and dents. In the mess halls, they spoke with shaking voices about the sound, that loud clank that had saved their lives. In the corner, Colonel Grow watched it all. He knew this wasn't just a victory for a vest, it was a victory for a way of thinking. After the war, Malcolm Grow didn't stop. He went on to become the first Surgeon General of the U.S. Air Force. His contributions went far beyond this, but his greatest legacy was fundamentally changing the ethics and logic of war. Before this, a soldier's body was fragile, assumed to be expendable. But Grow used cold data and hard steel to prove that on a battlefield full of destructive power, individual life is still worth protecting and can be protected. If you look at the equipment on a modern soldier today, the Kevlar vests, the ballistic plates, the modular protection systems, you will find the imprint of that crazy idea from 1940 to deep in their soul. Their design logic protect the vital organs, prioritize fragmentation defense, balance flexibility. All of it traces back to that antiseptic-smelling operating room, to the doctor holding tweezers, pulling out a piece of scrap metal. Sometimes, history is not changed by a powerful atomic bomb or a screaming jet fighter. Sometimes, it is changed by a simple thought, a stubborn dedication to life. As Colonel Grow often said, "I don't care if it stops a bullet. I just know that if I stop this piece of junk from going through his chest, he gets to go home." This is the story of the unauthorized iron vest, a story of steel, blood, mathematics, and redemption. If you found this hidden piece of history fascinating, strike that like button and subscribe. I am your strategy observer,